So my name is Danny Seabright for those of you who don't know me. And I'm affiliated with the college through the Eisenhower Institute. And I teach a course or a session at the Eisenhower Institute called Contours of the Middle East. Three of my students are my current session are supposed to be logged on today. That's Blake, Mason, and Lana. So I appreciate you guys joining and showing a little support for the session. What I'd like to do is give you 10 to 15 to 20 minutes, if I could, on just some overview points on what's going on in the Middle East today and the role of the United States in the region. And then I'd like to open it up to your questions about the Middle East and about the U.S. role. And then I'd like to save the last 10 minutes of the session, if I could, for any questions you might have about careers, internships, that sort of thing. Just by way of background, I went to GW undergrad, Harvard graduate school. I served in DIA and right out of my undergrad for 10 years, the Defense Intelligence Agency. I lived abroad and worked in a number of embassies. I worked in the US Department of Defense for 10 years. And then I went into the private sector after, in the last 10, 15 years, working in a number of capacities in consulting, and teaching and other things. So I have a little bit of experience in government and policy and intelligence with the US military, living and working abroad in US embassies, and then with the business world. Then that's my background and my experience and expertise that I bring to the table. So with that said, I'm just going to launch right in. The title of the session is US and Forever Wars. And folks asked me from the Eisenhower Institute to sort of talk about that because of what happened with our exit from Afghanistan in September, and the US leaving the longest war that it's ever served in, over 20 years, and the impact that had on our reputation around the world and in a number of countries, and not just in the Middle East, but much more broadly in a global way. As you know, I hope you know, the decision to leave Afghanistan was actually made by President Trump a year before he left office, and he put in place a timeline with the Afghanis that was to be implemented during the course of a year and a few months for the US to withdraw in an orderly fashion and turn governing of the country back 100% over to the elected government of Afghanistan. As we all know, that process did not go as we had hoped when the Biden administration decided to make good on President Trump's promise and to implement withdrawal. And as many things in government and foreign policy, when they turn out badly, our intelligence officers are blamed for making bad assessments, and our policy officials are blamed for making bad assumptions. And I would say to you that the biggest, the worst bad assumption that was made was that the Afghanistan government was going to last in place and be able to secure key parts of Afghanistan for a period of time after we left, after our forces and our diplomats left the country. And instead, what happened, as soon as the Afghan government got word that we were going to leave, their president, their officials, their military, their security forces, their police literally quit their jobs, took off their uniforms, and started leaving and quitting the country themselves, even before our forces began our evacuation process. So the country literally devolved very quickly into a perfect storm of a complete leadership and security vacuum, which was the perfect opportunity for the Taliban to come back in and take over and reinstate themselves as the leadership of the country. The Biden administration has received a lot of criticism from our allies in Europe, in the Middle East, in Asia, for the way it implemented the withdrawal, and for the bad and faulty assumptions that were made with regard to the withdrawal. This has hurt our credibility significantly in the global world order, if you will. So just starting from that standpoint, a lot of countries in the region, in the world, being very disappointed, upset with the way we left Afghanistan. I'm going to give you 4 or 5 other key issues that are unfolding right now that are greatly affecting the Middle East region and are affecting the way we are viewed in the region today. The first is the current state of affairs with Israel on the Palestinian issue. And I'll just make a couple broad statements, and then we can cover these a little bit more in the Q&A if they're of interest. But in large regard, the current Israeli-Palestinian situation has been delegated and relegated, if you will, as a sort of a smaller issue, sort of an afterthought issue these days, and is not an issue that is leading and defining the way our policy and other countries' policy is being made in the Middle East today. 20 years ago, you couldn't say that. 20 years ago, any meeting you had with a foreign official in a Middle East country, it started with throat clearing about the importance of resolving the Israel-Palestinian situation in an equitable means. That doesn't occur anymore. It's not the first, second, or third issue anyone talks about in any meetings. Sometimes in many meetings, it's not brought up at all anymore. So I would say to you, U.S. credibility, while successful resolution of the Israel-Palestinian issue is still a priority for U.S. foreign policy, most in the Biden administration, most in the U.S. government have come to the conclusion that there's very little we can do, there's very little anyone can actually do to resolve this conflict as long as the parties themselves are as far away and disinterested, if you will, in sitting down at the table and working out their problems. And that's pretty much the current state of affairs. So very much a back burner issue, very much an issue that most countries, most other governments in the region and around the world just want to make sure it doesn't turn into a more wide-scale conflict and just keep it a back burner issue for now, understanding that there's very little that anybody on the outside can do. That's the current sort of viewpoint, if you will. Iran, I think you've all read, is the next big issue that's defining the region right now. I think you've all read in the last month that the US has gotten, and other world powers have gone back to the negotiating table with the Iranians to try to reinstate the JCPOA, the agreement that was signed under President Obama to deal with Iran's nuclear issues. The jury is still out as to whether the Iranians will truly come back to the negotiation and truly agree to a reinstated JCPOA or some other new kind of agreement. In the meantime, they continue to make incredible progress in enriching uranium and keep moving forward towards the goal of building their own nuclear weapons. We have basically 2 sets of tools in our toolkit. One is even more increased sanctions, which we've already put the most onerous sanctions on the Iranian people than probably at any time in history. And the other is war and attacking Iran's nuclear facilities. The Israelis state every day that that's an intention that their government is looking at very carefully and closely. There's a lot of danger in going down that road, and even the Israelis these days are saying quietly that attacking Iran is not the best option on the table, and they're giving it careful consideration. On a more positive note, a third big issue that is defining the region today is the outcome of the Abraham Accords between Israel and a number of Arab countries, including Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, and a few more that are working quietly behind the scenes to sign peace deals with Israel. This is going to change the Middle East in a positive way, more so than, and it is already changing the Middle East in a positive way, more so than any other issue or sets of issues that have impacted the region in the last 30 years, in my view. And we're seeing the fruits of some of this today. Rather reluctantly, the Biden administration has finally sort of picked up the mantle and acknowledges that this is very positive force for good going forward, and is working with other countries to try to bring them to peaceful negotiations of their conflicts with Israel, which is still yet another, it underscores the point that never in the past would an Arab state make peace with Israel while the Palestinian issue wasn't resolved. And a large number of Middle East states are now moving forward and making their own peace with Israel and putting the Palestinian issue aside. A fourth big issue, a fourth big development trend that's occurring in the region is the great power competition between the US and China, and the way that plays out with a number of these countries who have historic 100-year-old trading relationships with the Chinese, going back to the historic Silk Road. And currently today, when most energy that comes out of the ground in the Middle East goes, the largest percentage of it goes to China and to Asia, reshaping trade routes and trade relationships in significant ways that also are causing countries to question the role of the United States in the region with regard to commerce and trade, and causing the US to have problems and take umbrage with some of the things that some of our Middle Eastern allies are doing with China. Russia is involved, is a sort of a tangential play in all of this as well, in great power competition, although Russia's role is more spoiler in Syria and Libya and a few places like that than it is in a great power competition way that the Chinese are. And then finally, the last big issue that's sort of shaping the region and having a major impact on US policymaking in the region is something that I call what to do about Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is critically important to the region because before the king is the king of Saudi Arabia, he's the custodian of the two holy mosques. He's the leader of Islam. He's the leader, the protector of a religion with over 1 billion adherents around the world. And then he sits and his people sit on top of a huge reserve of energy resource. Saudi has run afoul, if you will, of US policy in the last number of years. Primarily with regard to human rights and the way that they've dealt with some rather heinous issues like Mr. Khashoggi, who was a journalist who criticized the regime, and a number of other issues. But on the same token, the Saudis are making significant improvements going forward on the way they treat women. And the way that they are opening up. So there's this yin and this yang going on in Saudi Arabia, of a country that's critically important to US policy in the region, is trying to make very positive steps in some regards, but in some other important ways is not being a positive player, a positive ally of the United States, and has critical questions of the US role in the region, particularly this administration's role in the region, when it criticizes the Saudis as it does so openly and holds them to task on so many of these things. So those are some of the big issues at play in the region today. The economics, the climate change, COVID are all impacting the way these leaders in these countries are responding, and the safety and security that they're providing for their people for the future. The US cares greatly about this region. It still cares about the energy reserves. It cares about the conflict with Iran, and it cares about the great power competition with China as it's playing out in this region. I don't believe that it's right to say that we're going to be in forever wars in the Middle East, the US, because I think the US is slowly but surely changing its footprint in the region. We are trying to enable our key partners to take more of a front and center role in their own security, their own defense for the future. And I believe that over the next 5 to 10 years, while we will not leave the Middle East region, we're not going to be, unless something happens with Iran that I don't see coming. I don't believe we're going to be in a forever war situation in the Middle East in the future. So why don't I stop there and open it up for questions from the audience, from the group. And again, welcome. Do I need to call on people, or will you guys just unmute yourself and ask some questions, please?
I was wondering if you think that sanctions are an effective way to deal with Iran, because if you look at the Caesar Syria Protection Act, which was a really comprehensive sanction placed against Syria, it wasn't really effective and really didn't change the outcome of that conflict in the Middle East. So I was wondering if you think it would be more helpful with stopping nuclear proliferation.
So it's an excellent question, and it's a question that gets asked all the time at the UN and in any conversation when the US or any European country or any Asian country is asked to support sanctions against the Syrians, the Iranian government. At the end of the day, sanctions hurt the people. Sanctions don't necessarily hurt the regime in the first instance. They don't hurt the bad actors in the first instance. They hurt the people. And this is, from my time in government for the last 40 years, this has always been the hard question. How much do you have to squeeze the people and hurt the people with sanctions before that will have an impact on the leadership of these countries? Before they will have their backs up against the wall and have no choice but to make a change in their policy because the situation has become so dire. This is obviously the policy that we've employed or deployed against North Korea since the Korean War, and the people of North Korea have suffered for 50 or 60 years, greatly suffered. While the regime and its top lieutenants, its top leaders, can evade the sanctions and find ways to have luxury goods, Western media, Western movies, whatever it is, and take care of their own and take care of their family. So it's fair to say that the sanctions in Syria didn't have a great impact. One reason they didn't have a great impact was Syria was already in a full-scale civil war, and the government there was not in charge of, the government in Damascus was already not in charge of very much. So sanctions were again being directed against the people, but were not being, the impact of that was then not being directed against the government, but was being directed against this diffuse leadership civilization with leadership situation with all these rebel groups. And that's one reason, again, why sanctions were not so effective in Syria. Sanctions have been effective in different times in Iran. I would say at the moment, their efficacy is not as great as I've seen it in the past, because the Iranian government has figured out many, many ways to the Iranian leadership, the military leadership has figured out many, many ways to evade the sanctions. Again, we're hurting the people every single day. Even medicines and medical devices and things related to COVID that are not sanctionable find their banks and companies, Western companies, won't deal with the Iranian government, won't deal with allowing these things to be shipped, because they're worried that they're going to get caught up somehow in these banking sanctions and other things if they do. So it has this perverse adverse effect of even the most basic humanitarian goods being blocked from getting through. So they're not effective in many ways. They're very sloppy in other ways, but it's one of the few tools in the toolkit, if you will, to deal with a very recalcitrant autocratic regime. Does that help, Sophia?
Yes, thank you. And another question that I had was, I was wondering if you could talk more about the situation in Lebanon. Well, and if you think it's a failed state yet.
Lebanon is a failed state. It's very unfortunate. I have a lot of friends there. I've worked with a lot of people over the years there. When I started in DIA in the 80s, Lebanon was one of the first issues that I worked on, and with the U.S. government. And the country is all but the leadership in the country is all but has gone away at this point. I mean, it is a failed state. The U.S. government might not declare it that yet today, but it will be declared a failed state sometime in 2022, in my view. And I think, Syria and Russia, Hezbollah, the terrorist group that is becoming more of a political group in the country, will be the ultimate winners in the long term.
Mr. Seabright, I was wondering if you could characterize China's relationship with the region, and also maybe explain how their interests conflict with those of the United States right now in modern day.
So China's interests in the region are almost predominantly economic and trade. China has never, up until this point, been a country that has wanted to expand its political or military influence beyond its immediate spheres of influence in Asia or in the South China Sea, Taiwan, with Korea, North Korea. China wants to use its economic influence to and trading influence to establish long-term markets for its country for the future. Now, this is a really complicated issue from my standpoint, because our policy under Trump, our policy even mostly under Biden, is to bash China and to turn China into an enemy in many ways that it's never been before, to turn China into an enemy like the Soviet Union was during the Cold War. China manipulates its currency. China steals our IP for its own benefit. China has some really bad trading practices that all need to be dealt with in a professional, serious way. But taking those 3 or 4 baskets of bad behavior and then conflating that into saying that China is the big boogeyman enemy like the Soviet Union was during the Cold War, that's gonna bomb the US and the rest of the world into oblivion in a nuclear war, and that's their intent. It's just really wrong-headed policy, and we're in the process of creating an enemy that doesn't currently exist, and we've got to change that tact and change that path, or we will create such an enemy. Now, in the Middle East in particular, as I said, the Chinese want more market access. The Chinese want, because think of it this way, if you will, Mason, if you exported let's say it's the United States, and we export agricultural products, and we export all those agricultural products to one country, China. We have a trading relationship with China. We're not going to change that. We're not going to stop that trading relationship. Trump's attempts to do a little bit of that failed miserably. The Middle East has one thing that they export to China and that China buys from them, and it's the energy and the oil. No Middle East oil comes to the US anymore. It all goes east to China, Japan, and Korea. So the Chinese have to have a trading relationship with the Middle East. And the Middle East has to have a trading relationship with China, because they're buying their energy to fuel their economy. So it's working in the contours of those relationships to try to get our allies to cooperate with us, to hold China accountable for some of its worst practices with regard to trade, to keep the markets more fair and open for US competition in the future. And I think most importantly, to really talk to the Chinese with a fair amount of respect, not threaten them, but hold their worst behavior accountable and make them sit down at the table with us and try to resolve some of the most critical issues, and not just go around and shake our finger at allies, not just in the Middle East, but in Europe and in Asia and elsewhere, and say, well, you better do what we tell, what the US tells you, or you're just going to get into a lot of trouble with us and with China in the future. We all have to figure out a way to have a proper relationship with China going forward. And threatening our allies and friends is not going to solve the problem any faster or any easier. Look what we've done in this country to Chinese students over the last 20 years. We've invited 25 years. We've invited the best and brightest from China to come here, to learn from us, to learn in our universities. And instead of finding ways to keep them, to give them jobs, to keep what they learned and the great research and development and science and tech that they've contributed to in our institutions of higher learning, instead of finding ways to keep them in our country, keep them, give them immigrate, give them citizenship status or a certain immigration status, give them jobs. We're sending them home in droves. We're calling them spies, and we're deporting them from the United States. Now, if we have a brain drain going on, and we have a brain drain that's going back to China, we're as much responsible for that as anyone. I mean, our government policy is as much responsible for that as anyone. And we should have been working much more closely with universities, colleges, research institutes over the last 20 years to have a more holistic policy about how we provide futures for these kids, jobs, more research abilities, opportunities to emigrate and become citizens over time, instead of seeing a spy behind every tree, which is what we've done. First of all, the evidence shows that there's not a spy behind every tree. So there's 1 in 100 bad apple and 1 in 100. I'm sorry, folks, but that's not a crisis. That's just a problem that we all have to deal with, and it occurs everywhere. One bad apple out of 100 is not a crisis. It's an issue that's got to be taken seriously for sure, but it doesn't mean you throw the baby out with the bathwater and you send every Chinese student in this country home. So right there is an issue that I feel very strongly about when our diplomats go around the world and say, oh, the Chinese are ripping off our IP and stealing our best practices when it comes to science and tech and math. No, they're not. We've sent their students home that came here to legitimately learn those things. And now they are creating original IP back in China that challenges and competes with some of the best that America has to offer in a very, very, very competitive way. And we got to get our arms around that and deal with that in an intelligent way and not a knee-jerk way. I'll stop there. Other questions? Lana, from our class, do you have another question? Do you have a question?
Yeah, I do actually.
Please.
Mine kind of goes with Sophia's, the first question.
Okay.
I was wondering if you think the US withdrawal from Afghanistan and the backlash that we faced from that, if you think that kind of made the threat of the US initiating war in Iran less effective?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The problem with the way we withdrew from Afghanistan was it diminished our credibility. It diminished the confidence that our allies and our partners have in us on one side. Because it did that, the Iranians immediately stood up and took notice of that and said, oh, the US doesn't really have everyone on its side in a concerted, coordinated effort, doesn't hold the credibility that it did 5 or 6 or 7 years ago under Obama. There's wiggle room here. There's ways for us to try to hold out, negotiate, play the game of negotiation to get more out of this for ourselves. And the Iranians want, they have a couple clear goals. They don't want a war in the region, number one. They want to keep the Israelis at bay and the US at bay. They want sanction relief, and they want to continue their nuclear program. in some way. And that what the Iranians are doing is looking for a way that they can play the process of this all out over time, so that they get they hold it just to a minimum roar, so that we don't cross the threshold to war, that they get sanctions relief, and they still can keep their scientists and their engineers busy beavering away at creating and building their own nuclear program for the future. Maybe longer term, maybe not 6 months or a year from now, maybe 5 or 10 years from now, but not to give away the capability. Those are their three main goals and objectives, and what they want out of these sets of negotiations with the United States and the world powers.
Do you think if it came down to it, do you think the US would seriously consider initiating war? Like, do you think that's a serious threat that they're?
I think it is. I think it has to be. You don't make threats like that if you're not serious about them. You just, we've learned, that's just what we've learned, what we and others have learned over the years. You don't deploy a threat like that unless you're really serious about taking the action. The Israelis certainly are. The problem with all of this is it's not just about hitting a couple underground sites, a couple hardened facilities. The problem is once you start something like this, you never know where it's going to end. You never know what the Iranians might do in response with all of the rejectionists and terrorist groups that they control around the world. And then they take that step, and then we take a step in retaliation to that. And it just is this, escalatory ladder that you just don't know where it ends up. They hit sites in Saudi Arabia and Dubai and Abu Dhabi and in Bahrain. Remember, these countries in the Middle East it's like the difference between the border in Canada and Mexico. Iran's just across 60 or 70 kilometers of water. It's right next door. So it's very close by. And I don't think I know we don't want a war in the region. I know our allies don't want a war in the region. I know the Iranians don't want a war in the region. So everyone's trying to, and I just declared or just gave to you what the Iranians' three goals and objectives are. So everyone's trying to figure out how to move forward in a way that forestalls war, but takes away the Iranian nuclear program in some meaningful way. Now the JCPOA never was going to take it away completely. The JCPOA put it on a slow track of 10 years with sunset clauses and all sorts of things. With the Obama administration's idea that if we started engaging the Iranians, if we started letting them back into the international system, started showing them what the fruits of collaboration with the West and the international order could be, that this would have pressure by the people on the regime that would change the regime over 10 years. So that 10 years from now, it would be organically, internally, a different kind of regime that would come about as the sunset clauses of the JCPOA were coming into play. We never were telling the Iranians that they could never have a nuclear program ever in the future. We were just putting it all on ice for 10 years. That was the purpose of the JCPOA. But now we're 5 years further along. And what we did under Trump, when we withdrew from the JCPOA under President Trump, we've now given the Iranians 3 or 4 years of unfettered access to continue to work, full speed on their nuclear program, and they've made a lot of progress in the last 3 or 4 years. A lot. Other questions?
Yes, Mr. Seabright, I was curious if you could speak more about Turkey and their continued presence in the Middle East, especially now that they've been very visibly drawing away from kind of the US and its interests, and they've been more independent, especially in their aggressive campaigns against the Kurdish people in Syria and northern Iraq.
Sure. Well, I'm not a great expert on Turkey, but Erdogan's the president of Turkey's policies are nothing new. I mean, he's been president of Turkey for over 10 years. He's made a deal with the poor, uninformed, uneducated masses in Turkey, and has brought back a form of religious government that is very restrictive and very conservative. This is a, political Islam, if you will, is something that the many other Arab state, or many Arab state, not other, but many Arab states in the Gulf and elsewhere, is a road they have not gone down and don't want to go down. They see the Muslim Brotherhood and political Islam as an end to their regimes. So this is the main problem that they have with the Turks. However, given the diminishment of the US role in the region and US credibility in the region, you see a lot of Arab states just in the last 3 or 4 months going to meet Erdogan, making some amount of allowance of cooperation with him going forward, finding ways to restart trade, looking for ways for their businesses and their companies to cooperate and work together. This is triangulation at its best. When you can't trust your big papa, the United States, to be your protector, you go start having your own conversations with the Iranians, with the Turks, with the Qataris, with others. And that's what's going on in the region right now today with Turkey. This couldn't probably come at a better time for Erdogan, because his influence in Turkey has been starting to wane somewhat. He has been having problems in his ruling coalition in the last year or so. And there have been more and more challenges to his leadership. So I don't have a lot more to say on the way Turkey plays out in the next year or two. The one thing you always have to remember about Turkey is it has its foot geographically, politically in both the West by being half in Europe, and in the East by being half in Asia. The Bosphorus goes right down the middle of the country and separates the country, geographically and politically and historically. It's had a foothold in both places. Europe's rejection of allowing Turkey to come into the EU some 10, 12, 15 years ago, I have to go look it up on Google to remember exactly, that had a huge impact on the direction and the vector of Turkey when it was not allowed to join the EU as a European nation. And it also added greatly to the rise of Erdogan back in that day. So again, the history matters. And when Turkey was not allowed to sort of come into the EU and mainly because of the worker issue, the guest workers issue, that changed the direction of Turkey's leadership and the way the country has progressed ever since. Another, you want to follow up on that in any way, Blake, or does that help answer your question?
No, that helps. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Go ahead, Mason.
Over the past couple presidencies, we've seen like the pivot to Asia, and it seems like now more than ever, it's coming to a real reality with Trump's free Pacific policy, and now the Biden administration seems to basically be following the same steps. So I'm wondering, in the decades to come, because you've talked about how American oil imports are much more diverse now, in the decades to come, what does America's relationship with the Middle East look like, and what does the United States get out of being an influential power in the region?
Well, again, I think, we've been papa to all these countries ever since, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait the first time, the wars with Israel. It's always been the United States who's the big world power who's come in and guaranteed that the Strait of Hormuz would remain open and the oil would flow. We've helped these countries over the last 30 years develop their own military capability. We've helped them develop their own intelligence capability, their own cyber capabilities, their own security capabilities. And these countries are coming into their own in many, many important ways. They're on par with Israel in many, many important ways. They're now at peace with Israel. For the last 30 or 40 years, our main goal, one of our main goals in our policy in the region was to keep the Israelis and the Arabs from going to war again. So the role of the US, the need for the US to be what it was is very, very different. The best thing we can do is start accepting and acknowledging that these countries are growing up and coming into their own with adult leadership and coming into their own with responsible policies for development, for the future, for their people, responsible safety and security procedures with regard to COVID. I mean, when the UAE and Israel are the top two countries in the world for how they dealt with and responded to COVID, that should tell you something. When they are the countries that are developed or putting the most money and investment in climate change technologies, whether it's solar or hydrogen or whatever for the future, that should tell you something. The stereotypes are gone. The stereotypes are changing significantly. And I think the best thing we can do is understand how these countries are more grown-up partners to work on the front end of achieving some of the changes in the world that we want to see changed, and let them take the lead, working side by side with us without us lecturing them and telling them the way they should respond and what they should do. Treating them more responsibly, treating them more as adults, I think is the best way that the US can move forward in our relationships in the Middle East region today. Does that help?
Yes, thank you. Would you say, just to follow up, would you say that's sort of the goal of the American UAE Business Council?
Well,
what you guys are trying to achieve in a way?
Our goal and objective is to create my organization. What my organization does is create more opportunities for American business in the Middle East, and more opportunities for Middle East investment of those billions and trillions of dollars coming out of the sand in the US, in US companies and US businesses here. So, I mean, by doing that, we help cement the relationship between the two countries in a more responsible adult way, for sure. But I want to be clear that I don't overstate what our goals and objectives are. Our goals and objectives are focused on business and trade, creating better business and trade opportunities between our two countries. That's what we do.
Thank you.
Anyone that hasn't asked a question? Adam, Evan, Miriam?
I'd like to ask regarding the, oh, there you go first.
Go ahead, Adam. What was it?
Oh, I would like to ask, oh, wait. Here, you want to go, Evan?
No, go ahead, Adam. You go ahead. You started. Go ahead.
All right. Regarding the fact that a lot of oil trade or a lot of the energy market is going more so eastward towards China, given the fact that climate change is a serious concern for the Middle East in general due to rising temperatures, and just that will basically go ahead and completely cause a lot of migration shifts within the region and all that. Isn't there also the incentive of the energy market changing in and of itself, since I know the Chinese as well are trying to wean them, or at least the Chinese themselves are trying to focus more on renewable energy sources. So I guess what I'm really trying to get at is, would the energy market that the Middle East is known for historically begin to shift and change in a way that it kind of gives it a little bit of, it makes it less of a geopolitical hotspot, to put it that way?
So, yes. But what the Middle East is doing, the short answer to your question is yes. But the more complicated answer to your question is what many of these countries are doing is taking that money that they're earning now from the oil, and they're creating new verticals and businesses and trade routes. They want to be in Dubai, for example. Dubai wants to be, in 5 to 10 years, wants to be thought of as one of the great cities of the world, as a center for innovation, as a center for knowledge, as a center for the creation of IP, intellectual property. Dubai wants to be thought of like London, or as a financial center, like London or Paris or Singapore or San Francisco or New York. Dubai wants to be counted as and Abu Dhabi as one of those top 10 places in the world where that all comes together. So they're replacing being known for just energy with all the other verticals, with playing a leadership role in all these other key areas. And guess what? They are doing it. It's occurring. They are achieving it. It's happening before our eyes. The leader of their country gave a very famous speech 5 years ago, and he said, "We will celebrate when the last drop of oil comes out of the ground in the UAE, because that is when we will also have developed our economy to be something that is completely 99% other and doesn't have anything to do with oil and gas." And that's what they're in the process of doing. 15 years ago, their economy was 90% oil and 10% other. Today, their economy is 30% oil and 70% other. And in 10 years from now, they want it to be, as I said, all but 90 or 95% other and only 5 or 10% oil. That's their goal and objective. And so that will, to answer your question again directly, that will change the way they're thought of in the region, and what you need to protect in the region, and what the US is worried about in the region. But it's going to change it into ways. I mean, because they're investing all of that in the ground and creating these amazing cities out of the sand, they're creating new things that have to be protected, and new trade routes and new centers of excellence that have to be protected for the future. Not oil ones, but data ones for the future. Centers of data excellence, centers of knowledge excellence.
Right. And just to follow up on that, there's the general sentiment that the UAE and other countries that are engaging in those projects will be able to reap the benefits of those before climate change goes ahead and changes the situation, because those benefits are all great, but if it's 50 degrees Celsius, 55 degrees Celsius outside and everyone's cooking, it's a bit hard to stay there and live there, as opposed to just moving towards Europe or Africa or Asia.
Well, it's a great question, but what are the technologies they're working on for the future? So they want to be, right now they're in the process of developing hydrogen, and they want to be thought of, they want to have a company in the next 10 years that's known around the world like ExxonMobil is as a trademark, but it is a country that sells and delivers hydrogen. Yes, if the climate change goes in the direction that it's going in, and they live in a country that's an arid desert climate, and I can tell you, having been there, that it's 130 degrees in the shade in the summer and it's 120% humidity. It's ridiculous. But everything's air conditioned and people stay inside. So if all of a sudden you're pumping up the air conditioning because you're now living on an economy that's based on hydrogen and not petroleum, can you continue to do that? Can you mitigate the worst effects of it by the way you change, the way you deal with it? That's their goal and objective. They're not planning on leaving anytime soon. Now, there are some countries, as you know, in the world that, because of rising ocean levels, they are going to have to leave because they're not going to have any land in the near future. But the UAE is not. The UAE, Saudi, others are not planning on leaving their land and their territory. They're trying to figure out how to build cities, how to build buildings for the future that deal with the increased temperatures that they're going to have to face.
Thank you.
I see it's 9 minutes to the hour. I'd like to just change the focus a little bit, if I could, and let you guys throw some questions at me about career advice, internships. Again, my career was in government, in policy, and intelligence, and then in business. So let me just open up the floor and give you a few. I'll try to answer a few questions related to that sort of thing. Who has one? Graham, I haven't heard you say anything. I haven't heard Miriam say anything. Anybody want to speak?
Well, could I ask one more question regarding the previous subject first, or would that be?
That's fine, Evan. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. How do you expect the relationship between the United States and Egypt to evolve in the next decade? If you could describe some of their regional objectives similarly to how you kind of did with with the Turks and the Iranians.
So that's a great question, and it's an important one because Egypt is one of the most populous countries in the region. It's 70 or 80 million people. Many of them, large majority live in the huge cities, and then a large majority live in the country, and they're trying to figure out how to deal with providing these folks with education, jobs, and medical care for the future. Egypt is a democracy. The US takes that very seriously and thinks that's very important. The Arab Gulf states think Egypt's very important. There are many Egyptian workers at the highest end, from the highest ends of the knowledge economy all the way down to taxi drivers. Many Egyptian workers are living and working in the Gulf states and are integrated into their societies. The UAE and Saudi and others have been very key partners to Egypt over the years in trying to help them advance and move forward. The U.S., I could say the U.S. objective in Egypt is to help preserve and protect for the next 10 years Egyptian democracy while helping provide opportunities in education and healthcare and employment in various verticals and job creation for the future. That combination of goals and objective is what the U.S. has in Egypt for the future. And so do many of the Gulf states who have a lot of money to throw around and help in that process, and they're doing it. They are doing it. I used to go to Egypt a lot when I lived in Israel as a U.S. diplomat for other reasons, but I've been to Egypt 2 or 3 times in the last 5 years just because the UAE is deploying a lot of capital in Egypt to try to help them create new business verticals and new investment opportunities for the future. Does that answer the question, Evan?
Yeah. Could I ask as a follow-up though, does Egypt have the capacity or intention to have any serious geopolitical effect on its neighbors in the future, or is it mostly concerned with internal developments?
I would say it's mostly concerned with internal developments, primarily, largely. The only external concerns it has is then keeping its borders, and you know that there are problems with with a few of its border areas, and there have been, keeping those border areas and those immediately contiguous countries, making sure that they don't have any conflicts with them. That's the main objective of its foreign policy, and attracting foreign direct investment from around the world.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Okay. Anyone have any? Go ahead, Mason.
I have a career question, sort of. Right now, I'm in the process of applying for the Boren Scholarship. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's a federally funded scholarship for applicants who want to study abroad. And part of what I would get if I were to be awarded the scholarship would be a 1-year federal service requirement. And so
Yes.
I'm wondering what your outlook on a possibility like that is. I know you're somebody who started their career more in the government and then went into the private industry. What I wonder is, do you think this would be a smart move for me if I were to apply, and then after 4 years of college or my remaining 2 years, would it be smart for me to then go right into the federal government? I have an option to defer for 3 years. Or do you think I should go to grad school? I just wonder what your outlook on this type of.
I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I'm going to.
Yeah, of course.
I'll just offer you from my perspective a couple points. I gained the most amazing opportunities to learn and to grow in the government in the first 10 years when I was in DIA than I ever did at any point in my career. I learned the training and the educational opportunities that I was offered and that the government paid for are just things that you don't get to do anywhere else in government or out of government in many, many ways. So understanding that the pay scale is what it is, what I tell lots of students and younger folks is to think about going into government in the first 5 or 10 years of your career, when making a whole lot of money is not going to happen anywhere unless you're Zuckerberg and you come up with the new thing, the new Facebook or the new whatever it is, whatever he calls it these days. Go into government and get 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years of fantastic experience, see the world, understand how government works at the federal level between the agencies and the departments and with the Congress, and then think about going into the business world. I mean, this is what I did. It worked for me. It's been fantastic. I stayed in government 20 years. You don't have to stay in government 20 years. Maybe stay in government 5 years, but you will get amazing opportunity to experience when at a certain point in your life, your ability to make a huge amount of money isn't going to be there anyway. And this pay scale that you'll have in government will probably do you just fine. I know that I'm trying to put a number of different considerations there together in one place, but that's what happened. That's the way I did it, and it worked out pretty well.
Okay, thank you. That's sort of what I was thinking, is that this would offer me the career activity I need at the beginning of my career after college, and maybe launch me forward into different interests.
But getting scholarships like this is important. I would tell each and every one of you, do as many internships as you can do. Do an internship every summer, do an internship during the school year if you can. I was going to leave undergraduate and go to law school and become an attorney, become a lawyer. I really wanted to go to law school and get into the legal profession. I went away for my junior year abroad in Paris. I came back that summer and did an internship. I did an internship in a law firm in Paris, which I sort of weird, but I did it. I came back to DC and did an internship that summer in a law firm. And the two experiences together were the most god-awful experiences I ever had in my life. And I completely changed my career track and went in a completely different direction. I was in international affairs already, but just went in a completely different direction based on 2 internships that were terrible. And the internships should be as much about learning things that you don't like as learning about things that you do like, and figuring that out along the way in life as soon as you can. So take every opportunity to put yourself out there and test yourself and explore new things. That's one of the biggest and most important pieces of advice I can give you at this point. One last question, or 1 minute before? Any last career advice question?
I had a question. I was wondering if you know of any internships or fellowship opportunities in the Middle East. I just got back from a semester in Jordan, loved it, and would love to find an internship opportunity.
So there are many, and the first place I'm going to send you is to your career office there at Gettysburg College, because they have all that stuff on file. And what I'd ask you to do is go spend some time with them, do a little bit of research. And then I know all of these think tanks, and I know people at all of these think tanks really well. And I'm happy to help any one of you individually, if I can, with making some introductions, helping you follow up with some people at some of the think tanks or some of the research institutes in DC that might have summer internships, to make introductions. Many of those programs for this summer are underway in consideration right now if they've not already closed, but it's still not too late. But do that first with career services at the college, and then come back to me. Lauren or anybody in the EI will be happy to give you my email address, and I'm happy to help any one of you individually one-on-one as I can. Is that fair?
Thank you.
And doing an internship or doing a semester in Jordan is a fantastic opportunity. Daniel Jones just got back from one. He was a student in one of my other classes, and he had a great experience. I helped him hook up with the royal family there, and he did something with the Petra Trust and my friends in the royal family in Jordan, and had a great experience. So I'm really glad you chose Jordan.
Thank you. I love Jordan a lot. I did something similar.
It's a great country. All right. I think that's it. And anyone have any last comment? I'll let you all go, and we'll call it a day unless there's a last burning comment or question. Okay, everyone. Take care. I hope you're doing okay if you're down in DC with the snow, and if not, we're not getting any here in Gettysburg. It's pretty dry. Good luck with classes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.